I wasn't expecting to become a hero that day, but life has a funny way of surprising you. My name is Madison. I'm a 23-year-old woman who's always been a bit of a troublemaker. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows each other's business. My parents were strict and overbearing, so I rebelled whenever I could. When I turned 18, I moved out and never looked back. One day, I was hanging out with my best friend Evelyn at a local coffee shop. We were chatting and having a good time when I noticed a group of teenagers making a ruckus outside. They were being loud and obnoxious, disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. I looked around, expecting someone to take action, but no one did. "Hey, do you guys mind keeping it down? People are trying to enjoy their afternoon," I said to the group. One of the teenagers, a boy who looked about 16, smirked at me. "What are you gonna do about it?" I didn't back down. "I'll call the cops if you don't quiet down." The boy laughed. "Go ahead. They won't do anything." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I expected, the dispatcher didn't seem too interested in my call. "We'll send someone over if we have the resources, but there's not much we can do about noise complaints." I hung up, frustrated. Evelyn shook her head. "That's the problem with small towns. Nobody wants to do anything about the troublemakers." I thought about it for a minute and then came up with an idea. "You know what? I'm going to teach these kids a lesson." Evelyn looked skeptical. "What are you going to do?" I grinned. "Malicious compliance." Evelyn looked even more confused. "What's that?" "It's when you follow someone's orders to the letter, even if you know it's going to cause problems for them." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And how is that going to help?" "Just wait and see," I said, feeling a bit smug. I walked outside and approached the teenagers again. "Hey, I talked to the cops and they said they can't do anything, but I have an idea. How about we have a little contest?" The boy who had talked to me earlier looked interested. "What kind of contest?" "I'll bet you $50 that you can't be quiet for an hour," I said. The boy laughed. "You're on. Easy money," I grinned. "But here's the thing. If you make any noise at all, I win." The boy looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, no talking, no laughing, no shouting, no music, total silence for an hour. And if you make any noise, I win." The boy shrugged. "Fine, you're on." I handed him $50 and started the timer on my phone. The teenagers gathered around, looking amused. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, shaking her head. The first few minutes were uneventful. The teenagers tried to keep themselves occupied by playing on their phones or whispering to each other. But then one of them sneezed. The boy who had taken my bet groaned. "Hey, that's not fair. It was just a sneeze." I shrugged. "I didn't make the rules. You made noise. I win." The other teenagers looked at me in disbelief. "You can't be serious." I smiled sweetly. "Oh, I am." The teenagers grumbled, but I could tell they were a bit impressed. They tried again, determined to keep quiet for the next hour. But it wasn't long before another one of them coughed, and then someone's phone buzzed. Each time, I reminded them that they had made noise and I had won. The teenagers were getting increasingly frustrated, but I just smiled and counted my money. Finally, the hour was up, and the teenagers were relieved to be able to talk again. They handed me my $50 and started to walk away. But I wasn't done yet. "Hey, before you go, I have one more thing to say. You know how you were being really loud and obnoxious earlier?" The boy who had taken my bet looked annoyed. "What? Are you going to lecture us now?" "No, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm going to give you some advice. You don't have to be loud to have fun. You can have a good time without disturbing other people. And if you do disturb other people, don't be surprised if someone like me comes along and teaches you a lesson." The teenagers grumbled but didn't say anything. They walked away and Evelyn and I went back into the coffee shop. I could tell she was still a bit skeptical about my plan. "That was kind of mean, Madison," she said. I shrugged. They were being rude. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. "But what if they come back and cause more trouble?" she asked. I grinned. "Then we'll be ready for them." As it turned out, the teenagers didn't come back to cause any more trouble. But a few days later, I got a surprise visit from the boy who had taken my bet. He looked nervous as he approached me. "Hey, I just wanted to say, you were right. We were being really loud and obnoxious, and we shouldn't have been. I'm sorry." I was a bit taken aback. Thanks. I appreciate that. He shuffled his feet. And I was wondering, could you teach me how to do that malicious compliance thing? I laughed. Sure, kid. I'll teach you everything I know. From that day on, the boy and I became unlikely allies. He was still a bit of a troublemaker, but he learned to do it in a way that didn't bother other people, and I felt like I had made a difference even if it was just a small one. As for the villain of this story, well, I never saw him again, but I like to think that he learned his lesson and that he'll think twice before disturbing the peace again. After all, in this small town, you never know who might be watching, waiting to teach you a tough lesson. As a disclaimer, I must let you know that the following story contains some language that may not be suitable for all ages or audiences. I was at the park the other day when this story happened. I was there with my best friend, Eva, enjoying the sun and fresh air. We were minding our own business when we heard some commotion nearby. We turned to see a group of boys playing soccer, and they seemed to be having a great time. However, one of the boys caught our attention, and not in a good way. His name was Jake, and he was a cocky, entitled teenager who loved to show off. He had the ball and was trying to impress a group of girls nearby. "Check this out," he shouted, as he kicked the ball as hard as he could. Unfortunately, his aim was terrible, and the ball hit an innocent bystander, a little girl who was playing with her doll. Eva and I ran over to check on the girl, who was crying and clutching her arm. We asked Jake if he could apologize, but he just shrugged and said, "It's not my fault. She shouldn't have been standing there." I was fuming. How could he be so heartless? I decided to teach him a lesson. A little backstory about me. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and I've always been known for my sarcastic sense of humor. I'm not afraid to speak my mind and stand up for what's right. I've been in a few scrapes before, but nothing too serious. I'm also pretty fit, having taken up kickboxing in my spare time. So I walked up to Jake and said, "Hey buddy, you seem like a real stand-up guy. I bet you wouldn't mind doing me a little favor, would you?" Jake looked at me skeptically. "Depends on what it is." "Well, you see, I've been looking for a personal soccer coach, someone who can help me improve my game, and I was thinking you seem like just the person for the job." Jake's face lit up. "Really? You want me to coach you?" "Oh, yes," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're such a skilled player. I'm sure I could learn a lot from you." Jake didn't catch the sarcasm, and he eagerly agreed to the idea. "Sure, when do you want to start?" "How about right now?" I said, gesturing to the soccer ball he was still holding. "Show me what you've got." Jake started to kick the ball around, showing off his fancy moves. But I could tell he wasn't really focused on coaching me. He was just trying to impress me. I decided to mess with him a little. "You know, I'm having a hard time seeing what you're doing," I said, putting my hand over my eyes. "Could you maybe kick the ball a little higher?" Jake grinned and kicked the ball as high as he could. I smirked as I watched it soar into the air, knowing exactly what was going to happen next. The ball landed on top of a nearby tree, lodged in the branches. Jake's face fell. Sorry about that." "Don't worry," I said. "I'm sure you can get it down. After all, you're the soccer expert here, right?" Jake sighed and started to climb the tree. I watched him struggle for a few minutes before he finally managed to knock the ball loose. As he climbed back down, he glared at me. "What's your problem, anyway?" "My problem," I said innocently. "I don't have a problem. I just wanted to teach you a little lesson about being a good sport." Jake rolled his eyes. "Whatever. I'm out of here." But I wasn't finished yet. "Wait, before you go, there's one more thing you could help me with. You see that trash can over there?" I pointed to a small bin near the playground. "I've been practicing my aim, and I was wondering if you could hold the trash can up for me while I try to throw this can into it." Jake looked at me like I was crazy, but he agreed to hold up the trash can anyway. I took a deep breath, focused on the target, and threw the can as hard as I could. It missed the trash can completely and hit Jake in the face. I couldn't help but laugh as Jake stumbled backwards, clutching his nose. "Oops! Sorry about that," I said, still chuckling. "You did that on purpose," Jake yelled. "I did not. I just have terrible aim, I guess." Eva was trying her best not to laugh, but even she couldn't contain herself at this point. Jake stormed off, muttering curses under his breath. I guessed that he had learned his lesson about being a good sport and treating others with respect. The rest of the day was uneventful, but Eva and I couldn't stop laughing about what had happened with Jake. I never saw him at the park again, but I liked to think that he had learned his lesson and was treating others with more kindness and respect. I was just minding my own business, walking down the street, when I heard a loud voice coming from the local park. Being the curious person that I am, I decided to check it out. As I got closer, I saw a group of teenagers bullying a younger boy. They were throwing his backpack around and making fun of him. My heart sank as I remembered being in a similar situation when I was their age. Without thinking, I ran up to the group and yelled, "Hey, leave him alone!" The bullies turned to me with a mix of surprise and anger. "What's it to you?" one of them sneered. I stood my ground and replied, "He's just a kid, and you guys are being jerks. How would you like it if someone did that to you?" The bullies started to circle around me, and I braced myself for a fight. That's when I saw a man in his mid-30s walk up to us. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice laced with authority. Before I could say anything, the bullies pointed at me and said, "This guy's trying to stop us from having fun." The man looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "Is that true?" I explained the situation to him, and he nodded in understanding. "I see. Well, why don't you leave this to us? We'll take care of it." I was hesitant, but I decided to trust the man. After all, he seemed like he knew what he was doing. As I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder who he was and why he seemed so confident. The next day, I found out that the man was the father of one of the bullies. Apparently, he had a reputation in the neighborhood for being a strict disciplinarian, and his son and his friends were terrified of him. I was angry that he had used his power to intimidate me, but I also knew that I couldn't let him get away with it. A few days later, I saw the man walking down the street with his son. I approached them and said, "Excuse me, sir, can I talk to you for a moment?" He looked at me suspiciously. "What do you want?" I took a deep breath and said, "I think you owe me an apology." The man scoffed. "For what?" "For using your power to make me back off," I replied. "You didn't even bother to listen to my side of the story. You just assumed that I was a troublemaker and tried to intimidate me." The man glared at me. "I don't owe you anything. My son and his friends were just having some harmless fun. You're the one who interfered." I felt my blood boil. Harmless fun. They were bullying a younger kid. How is that harmless? The man shrugged. "Boys will be boys. If you can't handle that, then maybe you should stay out of our business." I was seething with anger, but I knew that I couldn't let him get the better of me, so I decided to use his own words against him. "Boys will be boys, huh? Well, if that's the case, then I guess you won't mind if I tell everyone in the neighborhood about what your son and his friends did. I'm sure the other parents would love to hear about their harmless fun." The man's face paled. "You wouldn't dare." I smirked. "Oh, I think I would. And who knows? Maybe they'll start to wonder why a grown man like you is so invested in bullying." The man realized that I had him cornered and he didn't know what to do. He tried to argue with me some more, but I could tell that he was losing his confidence. I leaned in closer and said, "You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should stay out of your business. But just remember, if you or your son ever bully anyone again, I'll make sure that everyone knows about it." The man and his son quickly walked away, and I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I had taught him a tough lesson, and I knew that he wouldn't mess with me again. As I walked home, I thought about how the man's behavior was a reflection of his own insecurities. He wanted to assert his dominance and control over others because he felt powerless in his own life. I also thought about my own past experiences with bullying. I had been picked on a lot when I was younger, and it had taken me a long time to build up my confidence and stand up for myself. I realized that by standing up to the man, I was also standing up for the younger version of myself. I was showing myself that I was strong enough to defend myself and others against bullies. From that day on, I felt more confident and empowered than ever before. I knew that I had the strength to stand up to anyone who tried to intimidate or bully me, and that was a powerful feeling. Looking back on that day in the park, I realized that I had learned a valuable lesson about malicious compliance. Sometimes it's necessary to stand up to authority figures who try to use their power to intimidate and control others. By being firm and standing my ground, I was able to teach the man a lesson and assert my own power, and that was a victory in and of itself.